senze nina, 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 senze nina.
I was born in June of 1944 and in Buffalo, New York. My mother was, at the time, she was moving around the United States because my father was in Europe, I guess part of the invasion, Normandy invasion. And so I kind of grew up as a war baby, part of the beginning of the baby boom. And I didn't see my father until probably a couple of years later. And then we moved to Los Alamos, New Mexico, which was, at that time, moving from military to civilian control. That was the military establishment where they built the first atomic bomb. And after my dad got out of the military, his first job was to come there as a security inspector. So he went there initially, and then a couple of years later, probably about 1949 or so, we came and joined him. So that's where I started school, started kindergarten, and went straight through high school in Los Alamos.
What was the social situation where you grew up?
I kind of felt like I was separated from things that were going on at that time. During the late 1950s, early 1960s, things like Little Rock and the sit-ins and all these exciting things were going on, and I knew that they had something to do with my life, but they were way out there, and it was I definitely felt politically isolated. When I went off to college, I felt a real desire to kind of get out of that small town life and kind of explore the world.
Did this aspiration that you had to kind of get involved or link up with the civil rights movement influence your choice of college?
Well, I started at University of New Mexico, so it didn't. It was just kind of like I went to the state college. But once I got there, I found ways to travel, and that kind of brought me in. Because I started identifying with the few people on campus who were kind of civil rights activists. I talked to them a lot, tried to find out what was going on, and I became active in student government, so I would go to conferences. And it was finally one of the conferences, the National Student Association Conference in the summer of 1963, where I first met people in the civil rights movement, people like Stokely Carmichael. That was right before the March on Washington, so I was determined to get to the march. I had never been involved in any demonstration before, so this was to start with something this big. You can imagine coming from a small town with maybe 15,000 people and suddenly seeing 250,000 people. It was just overwhelming, and to see that most of them were black, was just something that was beyond my experience. And that was the most exciting thing I'd ever done in my life up to that point. I didn't tell my parents I was going. That was the kind of excitement that I wanted. Even more than whatever happened at the march, the act of going there, I think, changed my life. I wish I had taken pictures and done something that could jog my memory of different things, the people I met, and I didn't do any of that. I didn't know that it was going to be historical. I mean, I just thought that I should be there. So it was 1965, and I started at UCLA and quickly got acquainted with people in the movement in Los Angeles. So I started relating to that group, and also started writing for the Los Angeles Free Press. I interviewed Stokely Carmichael a number of times. He started talking about Black Power.
During this period in your life, did you feel the weight of discrimination? And how did you feel it?
I felt more that I was fighting against it. I was part of the movement, I mean, part of what was happening is that the movement itself was changing. And for me, I mean, the fact that my wife is white and Jewish was a factor at that point, because this was the time of Black power, Black nationalism. And I remember one of the people I had been very active in the movement with, he, because of her, he said, well, I'll never speak to you again. And he never did. And I had never felt that the movement was about that kind of racial separatism, I guess. For me, it was really about freedom.
Dr. Carson, to backtrack a little bit to what you said in the March on Washington, you said you saw Dr. King and you didn't really remember much of his speech. What compelled you then to become so involved in the study of him and his life?
Well, that didn't happen until much later. At that point, my real connection emotionally and politically was with the younger people who, by that time, were becoming restless with King. The young people in SNCC saw that King as too cautious and not willing to go to the places they were willing to go to. So those are the people I identified with: the Stokely Carmichaels, the Bob Moses, people like that. For example, NVAC. It was an organization that you could only belong to if you had been arrested. So, there were no people in it who didn't believe in civil disobedience.
So, as you said, the group that you identified with were kind of not anti-King, but they didn't see eye to eye with his philosophies. So why was it then that you got so involved with his work?
Well, that, as I said, much later I wrote a book about SNCC, and it kind of made my reputation as a scholar who looked at the movement not from the top down, but from the bottom up. But then in 1985, Coretta Scott King called me, and she had heard about, that I was this scholar who had been active in the movement. And she asked me whether I would be interested in editing Martin Luther King's papers. I was at first kind of skeptical and said, maybe you should get somebody else. But eventually I was persuaded that this was something I should do. And that it would give me a chance to look at the movement from the grassroots up, and then from King's perspective down, and maybe come to some final conclusion about, I guess that's what I'm still doing, is trying to come to terms with how I would interpret the Black struggle.
Do you feel like your journey towards civil rights reconciliation and awareness is over now? Oh,
no, not by a long shot. I think that we're at a period of pause. I think that a lot of the changes that occurred by the 1960s were more legalistic changes. What we were able to do is kind of like eliminating slavery. It eliminated a legal system of oppression, the Jim Crow system, where discrimination was kind of institutionalized and segregation was institutionalized. We succeeded there, and that was a tremendous victory. And after that, the country as a whole kind of moved toward a more conservative direction. And now we're at a situation where the real question is, what are the movements of the 21st century? And what kind of social justice issues are going to grab your generation and see as the crucial issues of the 21st century?
We shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. Though I join hands so often with students and others behind jail bars singing it, we shall overcome. Sometimes we've had tears in our eyes when we joined together to sing it, but we still decided to sing it. We shall overcome. No, before this victory is won, some will have to get thrown in jail some more, but we shall overcome. Don't worry about us. Before the victory is won, some of us will lose jobs, but we shall overcome.